Yeah, thanks very much for having me. It's lovely to be here, and yeah, lovely to have a nice full shrine room. It's really nice to talk about Buddhist lives. I'm pleased that this was the theme of the series of how did Ratnaprabha put it? Interesting Buddhists of the past. So we can give we can give talks on Buddhist ideas, Buddhist ethics, actions, but something about learning about a Buddhist life brings all of that into the human realm and makes it more. It has this quality of inspiration, seeing values sort of lived out. And yeah, here's an image. This is exactly what Shantideva looked like. So hopefully that will aid us to imagine this great, very, very influential Buddhist teacher who. So he lived in India around 700 or 800. What's the word? AD, yeah. Over 1,000 years after the Buddha was teaching. Because he lived so long ago, there's not that much information about his life, and much of it has sort of mystified into legend. So we get to explore a legend, and we get to explore what we know of his teaching, and he definitely was a teacher. And the story of his teaching is a really fun one as well. But I'm going to set the scene first of all. So in northern India, established around 400 AD, there was a huge monastery that became really like a university called Nalanda. And you can visit there. Some of you might have been there. They haven't really finished the excavations, but it covers a huge area. So apparently 2,000. I'm not, like, sometimes when I research things on the internet to get a good fact, I'm not sure if this is internet fact or real life fact. So I haven't measured it, but around 2,500 acres, they reckon, at its height, which is 10 square kilometers. So given that, how old it is, and it's like a town. It's a huge expanse of Buddhist learning, and it just became a hugely attractive place for all kinds of learning. So I think this happened in the UK, in England too. Like monasteries would become centres of learning and education. So this is where Shantideva lived. So Nalanda University had 1,000-year life before it was sacked by raiding Muslims. Yes, it was huge. Not only did Buddhists of all, but by that time, Buddhist traditions had sort of become distinct from one another. So there was the Buddha, then and his disciples, and after the Buddha died. Different people practiced different emphases of the Buddhist tradition, and they all sort of developed and had their own character. And at Nalanda, you could encounter Buddhists of all kinds. But not only that, there was Hindu practitioners as well. And they all seemed to rub along very well together. It was also apparently a centre of other kinds of learning, mathematics, etc. So there was a huge library, apparently 9 million books, and I don't know how we know that either. So, but the legend is that near the end of the life of the university, it was burnt to the ground, and it took 3 months. This is very sad, actually, books burning, but the library was smouldering for 3 months before it was extinguished. And I guess the reason I'm talking about that setting is because the facts we know about Shantideva, I wouldn't even say they were facts. They're bare bones bits of legend. so understanding the context where he lived sort of helps to create the shape of a man. And he was a monk, apparently, and this is a very Buddhist sort of trope. He was of royal descent, and that story of someone who's destined for kingship, it's reflected in the Buddha's own life story. It's very Buddhist sort of myth of someone turning away from the peak of worldly status towards a renunciate life. So that's apparently what Shantideva did. So we think he existed. There are definitely teachings by him, and that's the legend around his provenance. He rejected worldly status and actually power, and became a monk. And not only that, but he became a very unassuming monk. So his nickname was Busuku, which means eats, sleeps and shits. So that's all that anyone ever saw him do. Yeah. So he wasn't a regal monk that you'd recognize. Oh yes, I can see you could have been a king. He was lazy and unassuming, apparently, according to everybody who was around him. And for a laugh, perhaps, or to get him to pull his socks up, some of the monks, or maybe his tutor, said to Shantideva, or Pasuku, right, it's time to show us your learning. You've been at this university, this great centre. What have you got to show for it? So they set up a big podium in the teaching hall, and it was very high, and they enticed him or pushed him to present some great teaching or present his learning. And everybody gathered thinking this is very un-Buddhist, this crowd of monks, thinking they were going to have a laugh, and this guy was going to humiliate himself. So first of all, the first humiliation lined up was that the podium was too high to reach, and apparently Shantideva put his hand on the podium, and the podium shrank down to an accessible height. Then he climbed on it. Then I think everybody started to think perhaps that this was not going to be the teaching that they expected. And he said, would you like to hear something that's been heard before, or would you like to hear something original? And they asked for something original. And what came forth is now called the Bodhicharyavatara, which is so like a seminal Mahayana, which is the kind of Buddhism that was a sort of flourishing, was sort of coming to an end around that time, text. So I've got a copy here, the Bodhicharyavatara, and it's a very hard text to describe because it encompasses so much, and really that what we can do for the rest of our time here this morning is draw out some aspects of the text, which I won't be able to do justice to discover a bit more about Shantideva. Yeah, so the Bodhicharyavatara is a piece of world literature. It's a poem. It's a teaching. It's a manual. It's a philosophical discourse, and it covers a huge range of themes that any Buddhist would be interested in. Themes of devotion, logic, how to practice the nitty-gritty, how to relate to others, how to view oneself in relation to others. That's a big part of the theme. And it's written passionately, devotionally. It's full of scholarship. It's very, very tender. It's very, very compassionate. and at the same time very strident, demanding, even harsh. All of these things are in this. Yes, and completely undeviating in its aim, which I'll get to what he's trying to get at, or what he has got at, as we explore this morning. I thought because this is a talk on the person Shantideva rather than his teaching, not to separate them too much, I thought I'd just draw out this sort of aspect of what we know about him, of this unprepossessing person who then dazzles a whole crowd of people. And in a way that I think that's like a bit of a fairy tale or a caricature. You probably get it in like folk tales, don't you? Of like the most humble person actually being the most brilliant person or the wisest person, and our human ability to overlook people who don't show up in a sort of shiny, grand way. And I've definitely overlooked people, and I was just thinking also that we might have an idea of how Buddhists kind of are in the world, and actually they come out really differently. And I thought I'd read you. So the teacher who founded this Buddhist movement, he talks about his teachers, and one of his teachers taught logic. And in fact, actually, I'm looking at a picture of him. It's that guy in the yellow robe there. Yeah, Jagdish Kashyap. And I just thought there's something about him and Bante's teaching of description of him that sort of reminds me of Shantideva. So he'd spent in this is in 1949, he was with his teacher. I'll just read the description. However conventional Kashyapji's teaching methods might have been, his manner of teaching was unconventional enough. When I entered his room, it was generally to find him stretched out on his string bed like a stranded whale. So previously he describes that he was so fat that he used to not be able to walk for a while and had to go everywhere by rickshaw. So he was stretched out like a stranded whale, sound asleep. For though he could work day and night when necessary, he could sleep day and night too with equal ease. As professor of Pali and Buddhist philosophy, his duties were minimal, and much of his time was therefore spent on the string bed, which creaked protestingly from time to time, and where he slept without benefit of either mattress or pillow. On my coughing or murmuring Bante, which means teacher, a single eyelid would twitch, whereupon I would put my question, which was generally on some knotty point of Pali grammar or Abhidharma logic, which I had not been able to unravel myself. Without opening his eyes and without moving, Kashyapji would proceed to clear up the difficulty, heaving the words up from the depths of his enormous frame and rolling around his tongue before releasing them in slow, deliberate utterance. Sometimes he rumbled on for only a few minutes, sometimes for half an hour. Whatever he said was clear, precise, and to the point. If I asked about a particular passage of text, he always knew whereabouts it came and what had come before and what followed. Yet all the time, he hardly bothered to wake up. As I returned to my room, I would hear behind me a sigh and a snore, and before I'd settled down at my table, Kashyapji would be sound asleep again. So people can surprise you. I think there's a moral to that. Yeah. So this text that was delivered, and I don't even know whether he'd written it down before he delivered it. I don't know how it's become to be a text that we can get our hands on. It's still in print. You can buy it in the bookshop downstairs. I just was checking that. this text, the Bodhicharyavatara, is a guide to the Buddhist path of awakening. So Bodhi means awakening. Charya is related to the word career, so sort of moving along, the career of the Bodhisattva, but a career in a completely different way to the way we think of careers now. Yes. And it, as I said, it's many things. It's a poem. It's presented in little verses, numbered verses. It's a book of praise. And a sort of paean, really. And it's confessional. He talks about, he talks about his own mind. He talks about what one should do. And well, here I'll read some of the verses. I've pulled out some of the verses so you get a sense of some of the scope of it. Yeah, and some of it's very memorable. There's lots of images in it. One that particularly I always remember is, why cover the world in leather when you can shoe your own feet? Yeah, why cover the world in leather when you can shoe your own feet? And what he means by that is, the problems of the world are not out there. I mean, on one level they are, but what we need to do is work on our own mind. If we try to solve everything if we try to solve everything on its own level, the world out there, we will come a cropper. What we need to do is look at our own minds and how we perceive things, and work on that. So some of it is rich and sensual, lyrical. So this verse, he's worshipping the archetypal Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, and he says, he uses this word Maitri, which is a bit like, it's related to metta, loving kindness. To those whose very essence is Maitri, I offer cloud-like palaces in the sky, to which thrilling music, poems, and songs of worship drift upwards, while flowers rain down incessantly on all shrines and images, and on all the jewels of the true Dharma. And like I said before, he's often strident and often uses warrior-like metaphors. One should guard against the attacks of the defilements, which are, the defilements in this case are, states of mind which are self-centered and egocentric, let's say. One should guard against the attacks of the defilements and resolutely attack them as if engaged in a sword fight against a well-trained enemy. There's a whole chapter, the perfection of understanding, which is philosophical argument, and he characterizes Buddhists from various traditions and sort of debates them, and not only Buddhists. So here's him arguing against the idea of God. If you argue that God is dependent on a combination of conditions, then again he is not the cause. He would have the power neither to refrain from creating if the combination of conditions were present, nor to create if they were absent. And then this whole argument follows, sort of destroying the rationality of a creator God. Yes, so this huge scope of, spiritual genius, I think, coming out from this man. And within it we encounter all the big Buddhist ideas. It's very, very all-encompassing. So we don't get very far into the text before we encounter rebirth. Actually, I think what I'll do before I say that is I'd like to read you the opening verses of the Bodhicharyavatara. Very beautiful. verses of praise, really. In adoration, I make obeisance to the Sugatas and their sons, and to their bodies of Dharma. So these are archetypal Buddha figures, and to all those worthy of praise. In brief, and in accordance with Scripture, I shall describe the undertaking of the observance of the sons of the Sugatas. Nothing new will be said here, nor have I any skill in composition. Therefore, I do not imagine that I can benefit others. I have done this to perfume my own mind. While doing this, the surge of my inspiration to cultivate what is skillful increases. Moreover, should another of the very same humours as me also look at this, then he too may benefit from it. This opportune moment is extremely hard to meet. Once met, it yields the welfare of mankind. If the advantage is neglected now, how will this meeting come again? At night, in darkness thick with clouds, a lightning flash gives a moment's brightness. So, sometime, by the power of the Buddha, the mind of the world might, for a moment, turn to acts of merit. So just to draw out, first of all, that the description of him this text is not, its aim is to train his own mind. Its aim is to, as he says, he's not imagining that he can benefit others. He's done this to perfume his own mind. And then, almost as a side effect of him increasing the inspiration and cultivating what is skillful, someone else can benefit from, then that's wonderful. And then it talks about this opportune moment is extremely hard to meet. And that's sort of reflected in the next verse of, at night with darkness thick with clouds, a lightning flash gives a moment's brightness. And I think what he's alluding to, this opportune moment, well, there's two ways I can think of it being. One is that we've got a human rebirth. We've got awareness, where all of us here now are in an opportune moment. We've got a consciousness that can be aware of ourselves and our actions. We can be aware of other people. We can take other people into account. We can decide things. We can have aspirations and move towards them. That is more precious than we usually realize. We're often very, very far from realizing what gifts we have at our fingertips, just not by what kind of wealth we're born into or material well-being, but just having a human mind with all its capacities. So that's a very important Buddhist reflection, that one sort of starts with that awareness of, rather than I think it's very, very easy for us to think about what we don't have. I mean, I definitely do that. What we don't have and what we would like in terms of possessions or skills or attitudes. It's very easy to think, oh, I wish I was more like that person, or that person's so great at all of this and I'm really far from it. All of that. What we can come back to is that we have all that we need to grow and develop spiritually. So that's one of the ways of thinking about this opportune moment. And the other is what he's getting to more and more as this text unfolds is he's talking about the awakening mind. So a glimpse, this opportune moment of, like, through the day, the sort of cloudiness of our delusion, the fog of fumbling through our days, we might just get a glimpse of a vision of how we could be, a vision of truth, perhaps, that actually things aren't quite the way that we thought they were, that perhaps there's another way of being, that human beings are way more connected than we usually go about, for instance. So that flash of another way of seeing, which comes and goes in a second, but it presents us with an opportunity. And sometimes, maybe just reflecting on my own life, sometimes I can think that, I have had flashes, maybe even quite humble ones, where I'm in a communication with someone and suddenly it's like, now I understand where you're coming from, because before I thought you were just being a bit annoying. But actually, there's something way more important than me finding you annoying, or both of us getting our own needs, or do you know what I mean? Like some deepening of an experience with another person, and that shows me that there's more of that to be found in the world. That's not over. That's not just a good moment in life. That's something to be sought. You might, when you're meditating, that you might just encounter a deeper layer of mind that's beyond the usual concerns, that feels truer to our experience. So it's good to reflect in your own experience, like what that moment, that lightning flash might have been like. Yes, and as I said, it doesn't take long before we're encountering more of these big Buddhist ideas, and rebirth being one of them. So he says, "You who travel abroad in the trading towns of the realms of rebirth, grasp tightly this gem that is the awakening mind. It is precious, essayed by those of immeasurable expertise, the unique caravan leaders of the world." So he's often talking in this text, he's often talking about rebirth. So this, whether you think of this in terms of this life and the next, perhaps, he definitely did, and that would have been the usual way of viewing the context of this life. What's behind that is the idea that the mind, what we do with our mind now, has consequences for what happens to our mind next. And he's always drawing attention to us taking responsibility for our own minds, and he's very, very unrelenting about that. He sort of comes at the mind and the way it falls into habits unhelpfully, like from all directions, in the text. It sort of, I was thinking about this. I looked in the mirror the other day and I was like, oh God, my posture's terrible. If I could see that all the time, I would always sit up straight, but I don't do it enough. And it's something like that. We need to do that with our minds as well, because if we don't reflect on what we're doing with our minds, it will just slump into bad posture. And this text has got this kind of like 360 approach to looking at the habits of our mind. And the habits of our minds, he's saying, if we don't slump, like don't fall into just habitual ways of self-centeredness, laziness, despair, all of these things, the fruits of that will be joy. So he's saying that he really, even though sometimes he's quite strict, and he's strict with himself, he's very strict with himself. He's saying the mind is where we can do the work. So, the mind can be like both imprisoned. It can be the prisoner, but also it can be the source of where the liberation can happen. And he talks about guarding the mind in this way. If the roaming elephant, he says, he describes it like a rutting elephant, creating devastation wherever it goes. So we don't think of our minds being like that. And then some days, I get this sometimes. I'm like, oh God, I've done that. I've done it again. And now I've got to sort it out. Got to sort of speak to that person because anyway, maybe try and contain the sort of trails of particular disasters that my mind gets into. But we've all got our habits, and we probably don't want to look at our minds in that way, like a rutting elephant causing devastation. But compared to how things could be, compared to what the vision, the Buddhist vision, what Shantideva's vision is, that's really what it's like. And he says, but if the roaming elephant, the mind, is tethered by the cord of mindfulness, every danger subsides, complete prosperity ensues. So the dangers come from the mind, and can be tamed, can subside. I mean, there's so much to say. I thought I'd narrowed it down, but yeah. What I want to get to, actually, let's just pause for a minute. I've said quite a few things, and maybe just any comments, or if there's anything you'd like me to elaborate on what we said so far, or questions, and then I'll get to the main direction of where this is going. Was
he a senior monk?
I don't even know, actually. Yeah, I mean, he certainly wasn't the most senior. He certainly had people above him. Yeah.
Yeah. What does he say to do to control the mind then? The gateway to the mind, or however you want to put it. I mean, is it just something as simple as developing awareness?
Yeah, I mean, he developed perhaps I'll say the names of the chapters. So there are 10 chapters in the book, and they each cover different aspects of developing the mind. So so the first is the praise of the awakening mind, confession of faults, so acknowledging one's faults and where one acts unskillfully, so harshness in our speech, selfishly, adopting the awakening mind. So that's really sort of following this a sense of determination towards liberation, which I'll say a bit more about. And then
I'll just comment on that.
I'll just carry on reading the areas, and then you can comment. So there's 2 on mindfulness: vigilance and the guarding of awareness, perfection of forbearance or patience, perfection of vigor, so having a lively and energetic attitude to one's spiritual life. Then the perfection of meditative absorption, so he talks about how to get absorbed, and the perfection of understanding, which is mainly this sort of series of philosophical arguments. Yeah.
In regard to the first one, you were talking about confession of fault. It's useful to recognise that, but it's also, I know for me, I could get into like a self-destructive, beat myself up thing about that. And you've also got to guard your mind against that.
Yeah.
Because you could put it under the umbrella of confession of faults, and I could say to myself, oh, I shouldn't have done that, blah, blah. But it's very self-destructive if you don't control that.
Yeah, and exactly that. Like a lot of what he is saying is detrimental to our spiritual life, is falling into despair, which would be another way of that going too far. And it's interesting because he's so strict with himself. He calls himself a fool. He he's sarcastic, so he's saying, he's talking to himself in this verse. He says, hey, you, expecting results without effort, so delicate, so sensitive, caught in the clutches of death and acting as though you were going to live forever. If that was my friend, I'd be like, are you talking to yourself in a nice way? But what we have here is a really, really robust human being who's very, very effective, very, very determined to undermine self-centeredness. But I think it might not always be that helpful to take on some of the language that he uses, unless we're completely certain that we won't undermine our efforts. Yeah.
Maybe on that, you mentioned practice, loving kindness, or equivalent. Is there any records or any reflection of this person putting that to reality? Because obviously, being harsh with oneself is very far away from the loving kindness practice. So I'm just wondering how that.
Yeah, one of the things was probably, how to say this. I think my thought about this is that he was probably a lot more robust than we find ourselves to be in this day and age. We're much more complex as a society, and probably need to speak to oneself in different ways. So that sarcastic, berating tone of voice would have had a different effect on somebody like that. And there are verses which I'll come to as well, like full of aspiration to, and full of tenderness, to move away from the sufferings of self-centeredness, and full of concern for all beings, including himself. So he, really, really looking up to other teachers, really aspiring to be like that, described in much more sort of devotional ways as well. Yeah.
Question online, which is, are our pujas, as in the pujas people do at North London, at all the Buddhist centres, related to Shantideva in any way, or how are they related?
Well, I imagine that person knows that they are.
Yeah, I think she does. I think she wants you to tell everyone about puja and Shantideva, is my guess.
Yeah. But not everyone here might have performed puja. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. So we do a ritual quite regularly in our Buddhist movement called the Sevenfold Puja, and the verses are drawn out from this
and
text.
there's the rejoicing in merit always after the confession.
Yeah, that's a good point,
that
Suma.
balances things up.
Yeah.
You bring to mind the positive of yourself and all beings.
Yeah, so I rejoice with delight in the good done by all beings.
Guards against despair.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So what I want to talk about before our time is up, which is very, very nearly up. Well, I want to say a little bit more about what the awakening mind is in this instance. So he's talking about this quality, this I don't know what the noun is. He's talking about the bodhicitta, which means something like the heart mind of awakening. So Bodhi again, awakening, and Chitta, heart, mind. And that's this experience which our teacher describes better than I can do. Bodhicitta represents the manifestation, even the eruption within us of something transcendental, the emergence within our ordinary experience, something of a totally different nature. Yeah. So he goes on to say the bodhicitta is not a thought, not a propensity, not an idea, not a concept, but a profound transcendental experience that reorientates our whole being. So why is this important? Well, what the Buddha discovered is that human beings suffer, and the reason that we suffer is because of our deluded mind that thinks that we are a fixed, an independent self, and the consequence of that is that we need things to sustain that. So I'm me, I'm like this, I need things to affirm that, and I want to push away anything that doesn't affirm that. So this doesn't take into account all of the conditions that came in to create this sense of self, and it cuts me off from connecting. It cuts me off because it puts me in competition, really. It's like we all have separate needs, and it denies the fact that if we can all, that actually on a profound level, we all want the same thing, and we can. The Buddha outlined how we can see through that through practice, and this is Shantideva's text is a manual of him working through this, and the bodhicitta is the expression of that, being not only for one's own spiritual welfare, like not like I'm a spiritual person and this is my spiritual life, but actually humanity has everybody has this potential, everybody suffers, and being connected with all of that. So there's no real truth in the fact that one can have a spiritual awakening that's completely self-centered, and that needs articulating, because even in like quite refined spiritual life, what can happen is that we just inhabit really lovely, I mean, I say we, not me, lovely mental states, and everything goes a bit more smooth, but actually it becomes a way, again, of having a sort of more like a refined egocentricity. Does that make sense? Like, which is nice, but that it's definitely not the end point. So that there's something much deeper, much more universal, and that's what the bodhicitta and the bodhisattva ideal are really expressing, this altruistic expression of the spiritual life. And the awakening mind, when it's coaxed into something more, let's say, I think it's there within all of us, and when it sort of comes to the center of our experience, let's say, it can turn into this immeasurably powerful drive for the enlightenment, the freedom. It's this liberative principle, seeing that actually it's only that can actually free beings from suffering. That suffering can't be resolved on the terms of just fixing things. So I'm going to have to leave it there. I'm going to have to say how this story ends very briefly. In the 9th chapter, Shantideva ascended into the sky and disappeared, and then the rest of the 9th chapter and the 10th chapter was discoursed through the ether from a booming voice from above. Apparently, he was seen here and there wandering India. Apparently, he was a palace guard, but with a fake wooden sword. Apparently, he married a poor woman. Sometimes he was seen to be a hermit in the caves. So once again, after this sort of magical ascent, he becomes unprepossessing, and some people even say that he's still amongst us, still pursuing the aim for enlightenment for all beings. Yeah.